So Peacemaker is obviously the new DC program from Suicide Squad director, writer James Gunn. And Peacemaker is essentially a spin-off of the show movie, Suicide Squad. It's about Peacemaker from the movie Suicide Squad. But this time, it is just Peacemaker and his merry band of misfits trying to stop an alien invasion of butterflies that burrow into people's skulls and control them like marionettes. That's essentially the plot of the show, and I absolutely loved it. This is one show that I have been watching religiously and have been trying to convince everybody I know and see to watch it. People on the streets, I flag down and say, "Have you watched Peacemaker?" And then they run away. I don't know why they do that, but I have been trying to get everybody to watch this because I'm in love with it. I think it is a lot of fun. It's definitely not as good as Suicide Squad or as ambitious as Suicide Squad, but for a TV show, there's a lot going on in this that I think works really well. And I honestly kind of viewed it as a mini-series. Now, I know it's already been picked up for season 2. Not exactly sure where they're going to go with it, but that's okay. Don't have to know. But this season feels like a really perfectly structured and contained movie. A 8 hour long movie. The first 2 episodes in this 8-episode show are the first act. The next 4 are essentially the middle act, and the last 2 are essentially the third act. More or less, you know. They do a decent enough job of getting you introduced to the characters, to the world, to the situations, and the ultimate conflict. But since it's a first act, you can't jump straight into the conflict, so they had to find, or James had to find little ways to make you interested in both the episode and the show going forward, and at times it doesn't always work, especially in episode 1. Episode 1 is probably the weakest of the show. There's a couple good moments in it, but it's one that just didn't grab me. Episode 6 is a standout for me, and the finale is a standout for me. Episode 7, in between 6 and 8, is a little weak, it's a little disjointed, it's a little jumbled, but we can get into this more specifics in a little bit. Right now, let's keep it a little bit broad. The show as a whole, I think, suffers from a couple of issues. John Cena is not a great actor, but that I shouldn't have to tell you that. Everybody knows John Cena is not a great actor. He's okay in the role. I think he does a good enough job to carry the show as much as he needs to. He's not going to blow you away with his emotions or his crying. Nothing like that is particularly great at. And him interacting with CG characters like the Eagle, not super convincing, but everybody else is great, so if they make up for that, it's not a big deal. But there is a couple of plot lines in this show as well that didn't really work for me. One specifically with this character called Judo Master, which is this small Asian man who kicks people. And that's it. He does nothing. Most of the time, he's not in the show. And when he is, it is just to have a little action scene to fill time, it feels like. Because the character goes absolutely nowhere. He achieves absolutely nothing. And at the end of the show, he's just kind of... They even have like a shot of him just in the middle of this carnage in the last episode, just standing there. He's crying, but he's just there. That's like a thesis statement for his whole plot. He's just there. And then there's another little plot line, a lot less grand as the Judo Master plot, with this janitor at the hospital Peacemaker gets out of in the first episode, who Peacemaker talks to about being trustworthy. He asks this janitor if he's trustworthy, and the janitor says no, and they have this long-winded conversation. The janitor is a pointless character, and it should have been just a one-off in this scene to have some fun, witty banter with Peacemaker, to fill time as well. But he comes back, and in episode 6, which again is my favorite of the season, I think, but he comes back because Peacemaker owed him a favor. So Peacemaker goes to this guy's daughter's school and is like show and tell for the kids, and it is the most pointless scene in the whole show. It goes nowhere. This janitor doesn't come up again. It is almost literally in this episode just to fill time. It was shocking to me.
Hey! All right! Yay!
But I guess now we can get into more of the nitty-gritty of the show because there is a lot to talk about. Specifically, one thing I wanted to talk about is the ability James Gunn shows in mastering simple things. The simple and fundamental parts of filmmaking James Gunn is incredibly good at. And that's why this show works so well in general. He's so good at fundamentals of screenwriting that it's like a breath of fresh air. It's so weird to say that something fundamental and simple as a setup payoff is a breath of fresh air and satisfying, but it is. There are so many little setup and payoffs in this show that like you don't necessarily need, but having them in there as a Easter egg when you go back and watch again and say, hey, that's coming back later, is so fun, and it makes the show a lot more rewatchable, and I don't understand why people don't do this more. I mean, of course you have the like big setups, like Peacemaker has a helmet that can sonic boom and blow people up that he uses in the first episode and in the last episode, and that's a classic screenwriting thing. If you have a gun in the first act, you have to shoot it in the last act. That's exactly what he does with that.
Activate sonic boom!
But then there's even littler ones, like this ape character that's being controlled by a butterfly in episode, I want to say 5, is set up in the previous episode. In episode 4, you see on the TV screen for a brief moment that an ape has got loose from a zoo, and it's that little setup and that little payoff that makes all the difference to this show. There's so many little setup and payoffs like that that make the show so much more fun and rewatchable. Like I said, it's just nice when a screenwriter takes the time to put these little things in there. Naturally, in a show like this, you're going to have multiple plot lines. A, B, C, D, all the way down the alphabet, however many plot lines you need to communicate what you're going to communicate. In the case of the new Lord of the Rings show, it's basically the whole alphabet. 20 frickin' 2 characters, you're going to need an extensive amount of plot lines, but we'll talk about that at another date. Here, there's a number of times when James Gunn has proven that he is excellent at not just writing multiple plots, but directing and intercutting them in ways that is incredibly satisfying. There's an episode, I believe episode 3, when John Cena and this character named Vigilante are captured by the butterflies, and Vigilante is being tortured by one. All while their crew, Myrn and Hardcourt and Adebayo, are trying to save them. And it's this simple intercutting between the two that could be completely flat and boring if given to another director. But what James Gunn does is excellent. Nothing short of perfect, honestly. You see the tortures happening and these characters trying to help them, trying to break them out. If you were just to lazily cut back and forth between the two, again, it could be boring, but James Gunn is able to create this tension from these two sequences. Are these characters going to be able to get to them in time for them to actually help, or will Vigilante lose his toe? And it's that tension that he builds up and holds for a long time, a really long time. It's like a 4-minute, 5-minute sequence where he's holding you captive to this intercutting he's doing. And I thought it was phenomenal. Really great uses of music in this sequence, really great editing in this sequence, and it's incredibly satisfying when you get that payoff, when he releases the tension.
Guess it's not working.
And it's, again, so simple. But people don't do it. And I hate that people don't do more things like this, because it's incredibly effective. And he uses it multiple times throughout the show, and it's awesome every single time. But even better than setup payoffs and intercutting is something he displays in the last episode, which is the changing plan. there's always, in films, there's a ticking clock. They have to do something at something at a certain time, or something's going to happen. And you know, you watch a Transformers movie, they have to blow up a thing before a thing happens, or the planet will die. Stuff like that. In this, the last episode, they have to try and kill this cow that is feeding all the butterflies, and if they kill the cow, all the butterflies will die. So they try to infiltrate this heavily guarded barn that has the cow underneath it, which is essentially this gigantic caterpillar, and that's the whole episode, is just this climax, long-winded, more or less action sequence. And again, in the hands of another filmmaker, it could have been incredibly dry. Just action for the sake of action, explosions for the sake of explosions. But James Gunn puts kinks into our heroes' plans that makes it way more interesting and fun to watch for the audience. It, again, is so simple. Just you have your characters make a plan, and then, oh, the plan is not going according to plan, so we need to tweak it. Oh, something happened, tweak it, tweak it, tweak it. That's the whole 40-minute episode, is just subtle tweaks to their plan until they accomplish it. But it is so much more satisfying to watch when our characters that you already like are improvising, and their plan is both working and failing, and they're just constantly solving problems. It's so much more interesting to watch characters solve problems than just to blow things up. And they blow things up, and that's fun, but it is more fun when they've solved the problem and that led up to the blowing up of things.
Activate sound.
What the f? How'd that even happen?
My hands are sweaty.
Overall, I think the show is great. If I haven't expressed myself enough, I would highly recommend you going and checking it out. I think it is a fantastic show. There's a lot of negatives, but there's a ton of positives. It's a lot of fun. James Gunn continues to prove that he's one of the best working in blockbuster franchises. His uses of music, his uses of editing, his actor choices, his writing, his character writing, and his ability to stay true to fundamentals of screenplay writing and filmmaking are a sight to see. Definitely check it out if you haven't on HBO Max. It's awesome.